What's up, my friends? Welcome into another edition of, well, sort of another edition of Crossing the Line podcast. Something a little bit different that we're trying this week, and we're going to start implementing it in the next coming weeks with football season beginning. Basketball's around the corner, the NHL and the MLB playoffs. We are ramping up our content, and so we're going to kind of take a little bit of a different approach. So as you see, it's just myself, Tyler Zulli, Jack Milewski. We're going to kind of break off into some teams a little bit the next couple of weeks and do some shorter videos, some specific content for a video as opposed to doing a longer podcast. Don't worry, if you like the podcast, we'll still be doing it. We're not getting away from it. We just want to add you some more additional enjoyable content. So first and foremost, Jack, as I always say, what's going on?
Nothing much. I'm just happy to have you not confused in which direction you need to point here. This makes
I
it
don't have to point
simple,
anywhere.
right?
This is
Yeah,
great. It's
yeah,
just
this
you
is
and
easy.
me.
Yep.
You'll hear from Mark and Mike in the coming days. I'm sure they've got a lot of great content to put out. But one of the things that Jack and I wanted to get into today, and in fact, the only thing that we're going to get into with this video are the rookie quarterbacks. And I don't have to preface this, but I don't have to try to build up because to me, Jack, there's three quarterbacks that are worth starting this season. Whether you like Mayonnaise Man or not, whether you like some of the guys that went a little bit later, maybe it'd be Jake Hayner or Sean Clifford or Tanner McKee. None of those guys are causing any friction within their locker rooms to start. So the three guys that we're looking at, Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud, and Bryce Young. And so the one thing that we assume is that all three of these guys are going to be starters in week one. It seems, well, we know for a fact that at least two of them are. Stroud is trending that way. And Jack, I want to get your thoughts on, before we dive into anything, your thoughts on a rookie quarterback coming in, stepping in, and starting day one.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like it's probably you could make the argument, but I feel like it's arguably the toughest position in sports to come in and have like great success in year one, because first of all, it's a really tough position to learn. Like, as good as you can be in college, the position is totally different in the NFL. The defenses are so much quicker. The windows are so much tighter. The playbooks are so much tougher to learn. Like we know guys that have fizzled out simply because they mentally cannot handle the NFL. The playbook is too complex. The reads are too tough at the line.
Or they just don't watch film.
Or they just don't watch zero. But I think the biggest thing about what's tough as a rookie quarterback in the NFL is chances are your team sucks around you. And like, it's really tough in the NFL. As good as the best quarterbacks are, the greats weren't great without a good team around them. And so that's the biggest challenge for these rookie quarterbacks, right? Is like, they have to be incredible, but they also have the least amount of help out of most quarterbacks in the league. And they're dealing with all this added pressure, a lot of money as a young 20-something, a lot of pressure on them from these fan bases that expect them to be great right off the bat. So as I think I will get into these three a little bit more, but I think like there's, to me, one clear-cut situation that is much better than the others, and then the other two are going to be more traditional rookie quarterback settings. But I just think it's tough, and then you add on the fact that these teams usually aren't good. It makes it that much tougher.
I think you're right with everything that you just said, and then I'm going to pull an entire 180 on you and say that there is no excuse not to start your rookie quarterback if you draft them in the first, especially high in the first round. There are exceptions to the rule, right? If Brett Favre is your starting quarterback and you draft Aaron Rodgers, you're not going to play Aaron Rodgers. If Jordan Love is the guy you drafted and you have Aaron Rodgers,
wow.
it seems to be one recurring theme. But the point is, if you are selecting a quarterback with a first pick, with a second pick, with a fourth pick, as these three quarterbacks were picked, the expectation is for them to be clear-cut starters. You want them to probably be, I know Pro Bowl is arbitrary, but at least it gives you a little bit of something to hang your hat on. And then you want to see the success and build upon, rookie year into year two. Success begins in year three.
Sure.
I understand that these guys are probably in tough positions because of the fact that their teams aren't super talented, but there, to me, is no justification to not start these quarterbacks if there's not a roadblock in front of them.
Right. And I think it's trial by fire. Like, you don't want to put them in situations where they're just never going to be successful for the rest of their careers. I think you kind of saw that a little bit with the Bears and Justin Fields, because that offensive line was so bad to the point where like you literally thought the guy might get injured every time he went out there. But even then, last year he forced their hand. And I think the biggest thing with QB is you need an elite QB to be an elite team in the NFL nowadays. There's no
Correct.
beating around the bush unless you're the San Francisco 49ers. Even then, they need a pretty good quarterback. So you want to know that as quickly as possible, because if you don't have that guy, you got to go back to the drawing board and you got to find him in the next couple of years in the draft. So I agree with you completely. There's no reason not to start the guy, because you want your answers as quickly as possible, because plan B has to come out quickly if this isn't the guy.
Yeah, and one of the things that you're noticing with a lot of teams, I think that um, obviously a lot of us on the show are Eagles fans, so there's going to be Eagles conversation. The one thing that the Eagles have done a really good job of is recognizing the dysfunction when they have it, and they've drafted really well the last couple of years, but on the players that they've missed, Howie Roseman's been willing to move on. Teams that are willing to move on quickly, the 49ers are talking about this might be the last shot for Trey Lance,
Yeah.
even though he's been injured and he's been hurt. And he's not really been on the field. They're already saying that, like, if this kid ain't it, he ain't it. And whether it's because he can't make his reads quick enough or he's struggling to come back from injury, teams that are able to move on from their mistakes quickly tend to be good football teams.
Yep.
And so when you have these starters, and I'm not saying any of these three guys are going to be mistakes. I don't mean to put it in that regard because I don't know yet. But when you have a starter start from day one, that clock starts to tick immediately, as opposed to, well, they brought him along slowly. He started at the back end of year one, and then year two is really the first litmus test. And you're not getting that full answer until maybe year four.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why when you say move on quickly, I mean, the team that jumps out is the Patriots. Like, the Patriots got so good at moving on, like a year or two before most teams would even move on. Like, they almost predicted the decline of players before it even happened. But in a league where the average playing career is less than 3 years, like, you got to make those tough calls. So yeah, I think I'm interested in all three of these young quarterbacks. I think largely, or not largely, but each for slightly different reasons. But it's going to be very interesting to see, like, which one, if there's a clear cut best rookie season, or if they all kind of fall in that mix of, like, there are some flashes. We'll see what year two brings. Or there is always the distinct possibility of people calling them a bust after year one, which I feel like happens at least once a year with a first round pick.
So let's dive into these three guys, because you're always going to talk about who has the potential to be a star and who has the potential to be a bust. And I think, Jack, and I'll let you expound upon your thoughts in just a minute, but I think for me, the answer as to who has the potential to be a star and who has the potential to be a bust in this particular instance might be the same guy.
It might be. I also think it's the guy that you might see have the worst first year, because the situation continues to get worse and worse as we speak. And by the time we publish this video, the Jonathan Taylor situation may or may not have worked its way out. But yeah, like, Anthony Richardson's upside is clearly the greatest out of these three guys. I also think the downside for him is by far the greatest. And I think when you talk about, like, situations not being great, like, he's got Michael Pittman to throw to, and Isaiah McKenzie's his second best wide receiver option. And then if you take Jonathan Taylor out of the mix, like, he's really going to have to do it all himself. And for a guy that was probably the most raw talent out of the three we're going to talk about, I just don't know if we're going to see a season that's super successful in terms of stats, because everything around him is kind of falling apart as we speak.
Sure. It's a really weird instance that Anthony Richardson finds himself in, because, like you said, there might be superstar capability if everything clicks and he makes his progressions through the NFL. We know he's an elite athlete. We know he has a rocket for an arm. It's the NFL stuff that you brought up at the top of the show that translate. And with the situation around him, it's a tough ask in year one. So you may have a guy who you're gonna see a lot of people proclaim, oh, this guy's a bust after 1 year, and then maybe year two he takes a small leap, in year three he explodes if everything happens in the way that it should. To me, Jack, and I don't know how you feel about these three quarterbacks in any particular order. Mike and I both rave about Bryce Young. I know the size question comes into conversation a lot. The size doesn't bother me right now. I think the guy's a winner. I think the guy knows how to play the quarterback position. This is not a knock on CJ Stroud or Anthony Richardson. I just think the guy was selected number one overall for a particular reason. And in his particular instance, his situation might be the best, because while the Panthers aren't good, they weren't the number one overall pick bad last year. They moved up to make this selection. So there are some skill sets there. Now, of course, losing DJ Moore hurts, but they have a solid, what looks to be a solid run room. The fact that they have a defense that is going to help this team stay in games. I think Carolina, and on top of all of it, the fact that they play in the NFC South, which is a total toss-up this year. I think that Carolina puts Bryce Young in the best position in year one to have the most successful of the season of the three.
Yeah, I honestly don't think it's close either. I sneaky like the Carolina Panthers offense around Bryce Young, and just because, hot takes are fun, but this isn't even a hot take. Like, I've started to buy into this. I think I wouldn't be shocked at all. I'll just say it flat out. I think Carolina is going to win the division with Bryce Young as the quarterback, because I don't trust Baker Mayfield. I don't trust that offense at all. Derek Carr and the Saints are going to have games where you think they should run away with the division, and then they're going to have games where you're like, because that's what Derek Carr does. He just then loses the easy game. Alvin Kamara is going to be out. That offense is really, like, Chris Olave is great. Michael Thomas will find a way to get injured, unfortunately, in the first couple weeks of the season. And the defense is fine, but without Sean Payton, that's going to be an interesting team right there. And then I'm not buying Desmond Ridder and the Falcons. So I think the Panthers are built around Bryce Young pretty perfectly as you can be for a first-year quarterback. I think Miles Sanders is going to be a lot better in the feature role than people think. And Chuba Hubbard is a really, really good backup. I really like Adam Thielen for the veteran leadership to help Bryce Young. I think DJ Chark's going to have a sneaky good season. He's the number one wide receiver to me right off the bat, but I'm also super high on Jonathan Mingo. And I think that's a really good pairing that you could see for years to come if Bryce Young and Mingo mesh. So I love the Carolina Panthers. I think Bryce Young, for all the questions of Richardson, like, physically he's there, mentally it's the question mark. Bryce Young's the opposite. It's like, there's no question to me mentally he can succeed in the NFL. It's just like, does that 5'9" in the small frame really play as big of a factor as some people think it might? I don't necessarily buy it, but to me, clear cut number one guy that's going to have the best stats season wise is Bryce Young.
Yeah, I think that the size is always going to be a conversation, but everybody that you laid out, you could even throw into the mix that there's a potential that Terrace Marshall starts to become a better NFL receiver than he has been in his first, is it 2 years now? I believe he's been in the league. There is a lot of fair points that you just made. I think on paper, and that's all we can do is project at this point, is that the New Orleans Saints are the best team in that division. I think their defense is still extremely talented, and I think Derek Carr is the best quarterback by far of the four right now. Now, I'm not a big Derek Carr guy. I don't like Derek Carr all that much, but that's just saying you've got a rookie, you've got a fifth-round second-year quarterback, and you have Baker Mayfield, who stinks. And the fact that Kyle Trask couldn't beat him out tells you all that you need to know about that quarterback, battle that there was in Tampa Bay. Would it shock me if Carolina wins the division? No, I don't think so. I think that any one of Atlanta, New Orleans, or Carolina could win the division. But every point that you made is 100% fair as to why I think you're correct that Bryce Young probably has the best rookie season of the three.
Yeah, and I think going back to Anthony Richardson, like Bryce Young, I again very shocked if stats wise he is not the far and away best performer of these three. But Richardson's situation is so crappy that I think, like, when you look at that, to me, I'm going to be looking at more of like the nerdy, like, not even numbers, but like, is he starting to go through his progressions the way an NFL quarterback should? Like, even if his guys aren't open, because again, I don't trust any receiver on that team not named Michael Pittman, who will probably be doubled into oblivion now because there's no one else on that squad. But like, is he getting through his progressions? Is he pulling down the ball and running at the right times? Is he staying in the pocket that extra beat when he should be, instead of pulling down the ball and running? Like, to me, the stuff that you're not going to quantify on the ESPN box score, or wherever you get your stats, like, that's going to determine how successful Richardson's year one is, because it's not even close to the situation Bryce Young has. So the expectation for gaudy stats should not be there to begin with.
So the only one that we've not talked about then is CJ Stroud, who looked to be a potential number one overall pick. Obviously goes number 2 to the Houston Texans. His situation is interesting because it's a very rare case of going from a collegiate team to going to an NFL team where you are devaluing the wide receiver position. Because last year, CJ Stroud and for his, the bulk of his playing career for CJ Stroud at Ohio State had the benefit of throwing to the likes of Marvin Harrison Jr., of throwing to the likes of Emeka Egbuka. And there's one that I'm missing that was just
Jackson
drafted
Smith
this
and Jigba,
Jackson
and he
Smith
was
and
barely
Jigba
there
is the other
last
one
year.
who barely played. These guys are they're all NFL receivers, and they're all going to be first round picks.
Yep.
Jackson Smith and Jigba already has been. Marvin Harrison might be a top 5 pick next year, and Emeka Egbuka might be another first round pick by the time this is all said and done. He goes to a Houston team it's kind of devoid of pass catchers, other than Dalton Schultz at the tight end position. Dameon Pierce isn't a threat to catch the football, but I think he's a darn good running back in the NFL.
Yeah.
His situation is interesting. First-year head coach with D'Amico Ryans, who I think is brilliant and is going to do a really, really good job there. But first-year head coach, first-year quarterback, a lot of question marks on the offensive side of things. I think C.J. Stroud could eventually have a really good career, but I would not be stunned if C.J. Stroud struggles a little bit in his rookie season.
Yeah, and I think the thing I like about Bryce Young is, coming into the league with a rookie wide receiver in Mingo, who I think can mesh with. We'll be interested to see if CJ Stroud can do the same thing with Nico Collins on the Houston Texans, because he's not proven, but he's the only one on that team that I think could maybe turn into something of a weapon on the offensive side. The biggest thing for me is I go back in history, like when was the last time that we had one of these Ohio State quarterbacks that was leading a national championship caliber team that actually successfully made the jump to the NFL. And I think that's my biggest question with Stroud is, like, yeah, he looked really good in college, but he looked just as good as JT Barrett did in college. And then JT Barrett never amounted to anything. He looked just as good as Braxton Miller did. I think he has the potential to be better, but I don't think he's, to me, like if you're projecting the careers of who I think are going to have the best careers, he falls 3 on the list of 3 that we're talking about.
So I think that when we were talking about who has the highest ceiling of the 3, I think that it could be Anthony Richardson. When you talk about who maybe has the highest floor, I'm cautious to say it might be CJ Stroud, just again for the third time, because of the Bryce Young size, even though I think he's a better quarterback than CJ Stroud. I think Stroud has a higher floor because all those names that you just mentioned and all those guys that were successful at Ohio State, CJ Stroud's a better quarterback than all of them. He's a better – Braxton Miller was a college quarterback. JT Barrett was a college quarterback. Cardale Jones was a college quarterback. Like, they had immense success at Ohio State. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to discredit their collegiate careers. But these guys were not good – like, they were not the guys that you were going to be NFL quarterback. CJ Stroud is the guy that I think is going to be an NFL quarterback. So I know you could play the trajectory of past history of a school or past history of a position or whatever it may be, because a lot of people look at the Pac-12 with receivers and you look at quarterbacks out of the Big Ten. CJ Stroud, I think, of those guys that you made mention, is the one that's going to break the mold.
Yeah. Plus, if I don't double down on this take, then I can't continue my hatred for Justin Fields and the thought that he'll never become a.
And my gosh, I forgot Justin Fields. And Justin Fields is so. All right, let me backtrack for a second. Justin Fields is going to be a better quarterback than CJ Stroud. I think CJ Stroud is a better quarterback coming out of Ohio State than Justin Fields. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Justin Fields, like, when you go back into that draft, you could go back and listen to the tape. I'm sure I have it somewhere where Justin Fields was quarterback number 2 for me. It was Trevor Lawrence and then Justin Fields. The Trey Lance, the Zach Wilson stuff, like, I didn't buy it. The Mac Jones stuff, I didn't buy it. It was Justin Fields was number 2. CJ Stroud's number 2 in this draft too, but it's a much closer gap between Stroud and Young than it was between Fields and Lawrence.
Yeah. Look, I'm still not high on Justin Fields, and I wasn't like incredibly high on him going into that draft, but I still thought he was the second best quarterback, which I think just shows you how dumb the Trey Lance move never made sense to me. Like drafting a guy that just hasn't played against elite level defenses and then expecting him to make the jump all the way to the NFL and be successful right away. Like, Carson Wentz did it, but then he got injured and suddenly he was not the same quarterback. So can we really even say that worked great with Carson Wentz? I'm not sure.
Lance to me in that draft, and I don't want to drive us too far off, but Lance was number 3 for me.
Yeah,
It was Lawrence, Fields, Lance, and then it was Wilson, and then it was Mac Jones. But I
sure.
think it was 1 big gap 2, big gap 3, big gap 4, 5.
Yeah.
Like there was no contention between those guys.
No, I agree. But yeah, I mean, I just I don't know why, and I guess maybe it's the Penn State bias, maybe it's too much on Ohio State, but yeah, CJ Stroud, and to me, it's also maybe I just don't believe that the Texans can ever develop someone incredible at the quarterback position at the NFL level.
Fair.
Like Deshaun Watson was, worked out for them on the field there, but it's one of those franchises where it's like until you prove that you can be something, maybe CJ Stroud is going to have to escape that situation to actually start succeeding at the NFL level. But yeah, with all three, I don't expect any of them to go right back to Trey Lance and Zach Wilson. Like I don't expect any of them to be that poor where just all of a sudden after year 1, we're not expecting them to ever get a shot again as a starting
Right.
quarterback or not deserving it. That's kind of
Yeah,
where
you're not going to end up in a like Sam Darnold debacle or a Jamarcus Russell debacle where like you
yeah.
look at these guys after year 1 and you go, whoa, these guys stink.
Right. Right. And in the case of Bryce Young, like best situation, but in the case of CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson, like I think their teams around them are really just not that good. So like if they're bad,
Sure.
everyone's going to chalk it up to a bad team. And if they're even like halfway over decent, people are going to be like, wow, they could be really, really good because they dragged a nothing roster into a respectable 6-11 or 5-12 record, whatever it's going to end up being.
So real quick, and we'll wrap this thing up because I'm sure we're going to talk about these teams in much further detail over the next couple of weeks as we do our full NFL breakdowns heading
Sure.
into the season. Give me a team roster or team record prediction for all 3 of these teams, and do any one of these 3 quarterbacks win NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year?
I think just because I gotta keep going with this take. Yes, Bryce Young will win Offensive Rookie of the
Yeah,
Year.
I agree.
I think that the Carolina Panthers are going to go, let's say 9-8. Let's say
Okay.
just over 500, and I think that's enough to win their division because it sucks. So they'll go 9-8. They'll sneak in. I think the Texans, again, because of just how crappy their division is, other than the Jaguars, I think they're going to win a couple more games than people expect. I'll say 5-12, I guess,
12.
for the Texans. And then I think the Colts are going to be a 2-15 team. And I think the only wins they're going to have are, well, I don't know what their schedule is, but let's say the only wins they have are in division. One of
Yeah,
them over the Texans and one of them over the Titans.
the Titans stink, the Texans stink, and the Colts really, really stink. So I agree with you. Bryce Young, I believe, is going to be the Rookie of the Year this year. I'll go 7-10 for the Carolina Panthers this season. I
Yeah.
think they're competitive down the stretch. I do think the Saints win the division at the end of the year, though, and we'll talk more about that in the coming weeks. Texans, a little bit more bullish on the Texans because of the fact that I think that they could find a way to sweep out the Titans and the Colts, and that's 4 wins right there.
Sure.
You find a way to win 2 to 3 more, and maybe all of a sudden you're in a conversation as a 7-win team. I'll stick though with 6-11. Going to give the Colts a little bit more credit, just because I don't think they're the worst team in football this year. I think that belongs to the Cardinals. I will give the Colts 4 wins at 4-13. But I agree with you. I think it's going to be Bryce Young as the Offensive Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, it'd be if he's gonna be a franchise quarterback in his career, he almost has to win Offensive Rookie of the Year this year because the roster around him is good enough, and that would be a logical step 1 in his career to be Offensive Rookie of the Year when, quite honestly, the competition around him shouldn't be that stiff.
So we'll talk more about this in the coming weeks. Like we said, we're going to do an entire NFL breakdown in just a couple of weeks. We'll give you division winners, award winners, Super Bowl predictions, all of it. I'll try to do a little bit better than I did on my baseball picks this year. But Jack, a lot of fun. Well, you and I are going to catch up in a couple of days as well as we talk some fantasy football. And you'll be able to hear Mark and Mike in the coming days as well. They got a lot of great content for it. We'll be back with a full-on podcast next week as well. So for Jack Milewski, I'm Tyler Zulli. Thanks so much for hanging out with us right here on Crossing the Line podcast.
Sundays are meaningful again soon, baby.